take a breath. Get comfortable tonight. We're unlocking a forgotten drawer in history's quiet cabinet. You might not know what's inside, but I promise it hums with stories. Let your shoulders drop and your mind wander. This isn't a bedtime story you've heard before, but it's one that's been waiting centuries to be told. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to cold. Not the gentle sort that kisses your cheeks, but the kind that creeps into your bones before your eyes have even opened. The hearth has gone quiet again in the night, and the only warmth left in the house is the thin breath of your own body beneath a wool blanket that doesn't quite reach your toes. Above you, the thatch crackles a tired whisper from a roof just as reluctant to face morning as you are. You don't bother checking the sky. If it isn't raining now, it will be by the time your chores are halfway done. Your feet find the floor and you wince. Dirt-packed earth isn't cruel, it's just honest. It does not care that you didn't sleep enough. It does not soften. It holds your step like a quiet challenge. There's a bucket by the door, waiting to be filled again from the stream. You know exactly how many paces it takes to get there. You could walk it blindfolded. You might as well be blind now, with the fog curling so thick outside you could mistake your own cow for a ghost. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders, the same one your mother mended 5 times before she handed it down. The wool smells like smoke and something older, like stories you only half remember but carry anyway. You open the door and step into the wind. It doesn't howl, it nudges insistent and cold. Your hands already cracked from last week's wash tighten around the bucket handle. This is how mornings begin. Not with songs or soft eggs on a pan, but with chores biting at your heels before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes. You fetch the water. You don't speak. There's no one to speak to, and even if there were, this hour isn't made for conversation. The roosters haven't bothered to crow yet. They're smart enough to wait for light. You, however, are not afforded that kind of wisdom or choice. By the time you return, your skirt hem is soaked with dew. You stopped caring about dry hems a long time ago. Around the 3rd goat, probably. There's always another splash, another puddle, another task waiting. You light the fire, coaxing flame from damp wood with the tenderness of a midwife. Some days it takes, some days it doesn't. This morning, by some small grace, the coals catch, and for a moment your fingertips warm just enough to feel like yours again. You begin the bread, not because you want to, because it must be done. The flour was coarse to begin with, and now it clumps in the bowl stubborn and slow. Your arms knead with the rhythm of women before you and women who will never be named. The dough pushes back. You push harder. There is no one else here to do it. This is not a life of grand events. No horns or scrolls. No gallant rescues. No romantic tragedies written down for generations to sigh over. It is a life of repetition of skill that goes unnoticed, of patience that borders on sainthood. You have stitched more seams than a noblewoman has letters in her name. You have counted days by loaves, not by calendars. The cruel truth. No one remembers who kept the hearth going, who rose before light, who made sure the child was warm or the chicken didn't escape again. But history was built on your back, quiet as it was. Every stone in the church was lifted by someone who had to go home and still scrub the pots. And in all this, there is something even stranger You carry pride, not the kind that's shouted, the kind that hums in your chest when the bread rises just right, when the fire doesn't go out, when the goats stay where you left them. You don't need applause, but you do keep a mental ledger of small victories. That pot that didn't crack this year, that new stitch you tried that actually held, that moment your youngest stopped crying just because you touched her hair. You exist in the cracks of history, and yet without you, the walls fall. That is the paradox. They forget you, but they fall without you. Scholars may debate when the feudal system shifted, or which crown belonged to whom, but none of it matters if no one made breakfast. There's a whisper of a thought as you feed the fire again. Survival isn't just about breath. It's about persistence, about keeping the rhythm when the song is long gone, about doing it all again tomorrow and the day after that, because the world, for all its noise and cruelty, needs someone who wakes in the dark and gets to work. And today, as every day, that someone is you. You don't remember the first time someone decided what your body should be doing. Maybe it was before you even knew the names of your own limbs. But in this medieval life, your body has always been spoken for, by lords, by fathers, by rules written without your voice. You are muscle before you are mind labor, before you are self. This morning, it's firewood. Your arms pull and stack until they tremble, until they forget they're yours. Blisters have become calluses. Dirt is no longer something that appears, it is something that stays. You bend, lift, drag, turn. The rhythm of your day is measured in tasks, not hours. There is no clock, but the sun, no reward, but the small relief of a job done and not collapsing in the process. Your hands serve the bread, the water, the wash. They shape dough, scrub linens, coax life from ashes. They are not your hands, not really. They are tools expected to function, expected to last. Even when they ache, even when they bleed. No one asks how they feel. That is not their purpose. You stir the soup, clockwise, always clockwise. Not because you believe in devils, though some old women in the village do, but because superstition is a kind of ownership. If you can't control what your hands do all day, at least you control how the soup turns. 13 times like your mother taught you. You don't question why. It's not the time for questions. And then, of course, there's your walk, the angle of your wrist, the slope of your neckline. In a world where your body works all day, it is also constantly watched. Modesty is not a choice, it's a commandment. Too fast and you're reckless. Too slow and you're lazy. Too much smile and you must be seeking attention. Not enough and you're cold. Your body is labor and morality and reputation all at once, and none of it is yours. If you complain, you're ungrateful. If you rest, you're slothful. If you collapse, someone will say you should have eaten more barley, or prayed harder, or not spoken ill of the saint last week. Suffering is expected. Silence is praised. Joy is tolerated only in whispers. And yet there is survival. You survive by becoming clever, by learning where to tuck your exhaustion in a sigh that turns into a song in the weight shifted to the other leg, while the pot boils in the shared glance across the market when another woman knows exactly what you're not saying out loud. You survive with humor, not loud, belly-shaking laughter that would be too bold, but quiet jokes under your breath, little rhymes about the Lord's smelly boots, or how Brother Alain smells like wet goats. It's not rebellion, but it's close. A crooked smile can feel like revolution when your days are otherwise straight lines. Your body aches, yes, but it also remembers. It remembers how to knead the dough just so to hold the baby without waking her to turn the wool into something wearable with only a spindle and a prayer. There is memory in your muscles that no one taught you directly. It was passed down in chores, in correction, in imitation. This is how you know things without ever being told. Historians ask whether women like you had agency. And maybe the answer isn't as neat as they'd like. Maybe it isn't written in letters or legal texts, but in the way you place your foot down steady when the hill is slick, in the way your hands fold the herbs just right, in the way you hold your breath when someone important walks by, then exhale the second they're gone. You are tired, often. But you are also persistent, even when the days stretch endlessly, even when no one thanks you, even when your name is never recorded. You are still here. And even if your body doesn't entirely belong to you, even if it is used and seen and judged, there are small spaces within it that remain untouched by all that. Behind your ribs, perhaps, or in the curl of your fingers when no one is watching. A tiny kingdom of your own, ruled in silence where no command enters. There is dignity there, not the grand kind they sing about, but the quiet dignity of not giving up, of waking up again tomorrow and lifting the wood again, of doing the work, surviving the gaze, stirring the soup, and maybe, if the wind is right, humming a song you made up just to make the goat laugh. That at least no one can take. You stand in the doorway with your hands dusted in flour and your stomach echoing with a kind of emptiness that's too old to name. The bread is baking slowly, unevenly, but it's baking. The child is quiet, bundled in the corner, with a dull wooden toy and a smear of porridge on her chin. And you're already thinking about the next meal. You always are. It's not that food is scarce, though it often is. It's that it never lasts long enough. A full belly is a fleeting miracle, like a rainbow or a dry laundry day. And in this house, in this life, you've learned that hunger is not a moment. It's a mood, a background hum, like the creak of rafters or the ticking of chores. You can function with it. You just stop expecting it to go away. The hearth offers no surprises today. No meat, of course. Not unless you count the salted scrap you're saving for when someone falls ill and needs strength, though it's unclear how a piece of something gray and chewy provides that. No cheese because the goat is sulking again and refuses to give up more than a splash. And no eggs because the hens are molting and need their strength more than you do, apparently. So what does that leave? A handful of barley. A carrot so thin it's practically theoretical. And a turnip that's gone soft on one side. You cut away the worst of it and pretend the rest is fine. The pot goes on the fire with water and hope. It's not a feast, but it's not nothing. You stir slowly, clockwise, always clockwise, not for superstition, but because it's what your mother did. And if it was good enough for her, it's good enough for you. The truth is, medieval women were often the ones who made meals appear out of absence. The term housewife didn't mean someone resting by the hearth. It meant manager-improviser, small-time alchemist. You're expected to feed, heal, mend, and somehow stretch a pantry shelf until it covers an entire season. No markets today. And even if there were, your coin pouch is emptier than the bread shelf. And here's the strange, almost laughable thing to feel hungry now. is almost lucky, because it means there's been food before, enough to miss. Some days, you go without the ache, not because you're full, but because the ache has gone quiet like an old dog that's tired of barking. You remember once, years ago, overhearing a traveling friar say that hunger brings people closer to God. You wanted to laugh then. You still want to laugh now. Because if that were true, you'd be practically sitting in his lap by now. The little one asks if there will be honey in the porridge. You smile, shake your head. Maybe tomorrow. She nods, accepting that soft lie the way children do. You make a mental note, try to trade for honey next market day. Or find someone with a cousin near bees. And here's the scholarly debate, lingering just beneath your stirring spoon. What does it mean to provide? When you can't provide, enough historians often study kings, lords, and merchants through the lens of what they owned. But women like you're measured by how well you may do without. The pot bubbles faintly. You stir again. This is how you survive, not through conquest or invention, but through clever substitutions and small sacrifices. Through stretching the last cup of grain and making it seem like a meal. Through pretending that stale bread is a treat if you fry it long enough in whatever drippings remain. Through smiling when the child says it tastes nice even if it doesn't. You remember a neighbor once tried putting thistle leaves in stew. You tried it too once. The bitterness stayed on your tongue for days. But you didn't starve. And that, frankly, is the standard. Outside, the wind picks up again. The sky is still the color of dishwater. You consider stepping out to gather herbs, but your knees say no. They've said no all week, and they're louder than you are now. So instead, you sit near the hearth. Let the fire do what it can. Let the pot mutter on the coals. You cradle your elbows and imagine butter. Not because it's realistic, but because you remember it, just once, at your cousin's wedding years ago. The thick golden smear across a slice of fresh bread. A luxury so beautiful it felt like music in your mouth. You let yourself remember that, just for a moment. Then you open your eyes, stir the pot again, and taste the broth. It's thin, but warm, and it will keep the little one from crying tonight. That's enough. You'll eat last. You always do. Because someone has to make sure the others have more. Because that's what you do. And not because you're noble. But because the alternative, the sound of a hungry child at night, is worse than the emptiness in your own belly. They won't write songs about this. No minstrel will come knocking to sing the praises of barley and boiled carrot. But if survival had a soundtrack, it would probably sound like your wooden spoon against this pot. So you hum just a little and keep stirring. You're too small for the dress. It's borrowed, of course, handed down from a cousin whose hips grew faster than yours ever will. It smells faintly of lavender, but also of mildew and age, as though it remembers all the other girls it tried to make into women before you. The bodice doesn't quite close. Your aunt huffs and pins it shut with the determination of someone trying to seal a letter that's not ready to be read. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth. Not a red carpet, not even a wooden plank. Your shoes are new, though, because someone said it mattered. Said the man should see your feet look clean before he sees your face look frightened. You're not yet bleeding, but you're betrothed. And today that's enough. In a village where winters are long and grain stores are short, marriage isn't romance, It's survival in a slightly nicer dress. The man's beard is gray. He's old enough to remember when the local priest still had teeth, which makes him ancient in your estimation. He says nothing, just nods. You are expected to do the same. The wedding feast is modest. Stew and bread, and 2 cups of thin wine carefully watered down so no one slurs their blessings. You are praised for your quietness. They mean obedience, but you're too nervous to speak anyway. A woman near the fire hums a tune you've never heard before. She catches your eye and winks. It's not cruel. It's almost kind. The sort of kindness that says, I know. She doesn't say more. She doesn't need to. You know this marriage isn't about you. Later that night, you lie awake on straw that scratches. The new husband snores beside you like he's slept through every first night since the dawn of time. You're not hurt, not really. Just confused. The way a child is confused when she's asked to hold a knife without knowing what she's supposed to cut. No one taught you this part. They taught you to knead bread, to keep broth warm, to say yes with your eyes down. But they didn't teach you how to grieve your own childhood while living through it. And so you do what girls do. You count the cracks in the ceiling. You try to remember what your mother smelled like when she bent to kiss your forehead goodnight. You wonder whether you'll still be yourself when the sun comes up. Somewhere outside, a dog barks. It's a rough, mournful sound, maybe just warning off a fox, or maybe voicing what you can't. You curl tighter, wondering if other girls feel the same cold at the base of the spine when the world changes without their permission. Let's be honest, the Middle Ages weren't particularly interested in your opinion. Canon law in parts of Europe allowed marriage from age 12, sometimes younger, with parental consent. Child brides were assets to be managed, not voices to be heard. And maturity that was measured in whether you could carry water and survive childbirth, not in whether you understood any of it. There's a strange logic to the way time bends here. You are old enough to marry, but too young to choose the ribbon in your hair. You are a wife, but not yet a woman in your own eyes. Everyone around you acts like this is natural, normal, expected. And that perhaps is the cruelest part. But history isn't made only of kings and wars. It's made of small rooms like this, of quiet first nights and frightened thoughts no one wrote down, of girls turned women before they learned to be girls, and of the resilience that bloomed anyway. Because here's the odd thing, many of them survived. Not all, no, but many. They grew into their roles, made room for laughter. Between chores, found allies in kitchens and corners. They learned to turn silence into strength, to wield their daily routines like armor. Still, the question lingers like smoke above a damp hearth. Can a life truly be called lived if it was never chosen? That's not a question your husband will ask. It's not one your neighbors will ponder, but you will. Every time you hear a girl laugh too freely in the market. Every time you feel a pang of something that used to be called freedom. And yet you keep going, because that's what women do. You tuck the question away. You soften into the shape the world demands. But somewhere in the part of you, no one sees you keep a scrap of your younger self. Hidden, waiting, breathing. You learn early that silence can be softer than screams. The first time you witness a birth, you're not even old enough to bleed yourself. You're handed a warm cloth and told not to drop it. The mother is a neighbor, maybe 30, maybe younger, maybe older. It's hard to tell when faces carry so much sun and sorrow. She doesn't scream. She bites the corner of a blanket, her eyes fixed on the rafters as if she's watching someone else go through it. No men are allowed in the room. Not that they'd want to be. Birth is messy, loud, and frightening to those who've never cleaned blood from floorboards or prayed over limp bundles. You stand in the corner and try not to breathe too loud. Later, they let you hold the baby. He is warm and quiet. You think this is what miracles must feel like, but not all babies cry. And not all mothers get to hold theirs. There are no hospitals, no antiseptics, no idea of infection beyond a vague sense that something foul has crept in with the wind. The midwife uses her hands, her herbs, and her hope. If she's skilled, and many are passed down through generations, you stand a chance. But still, the odds are cruel. You learn not to ask too many questions. The women who survive childbirth walk like veterans. There's a heaviness in their gait that no linen skirt can hide. You can recognize them by the way they wince when they sit, or how they close their eyes for a second too long when a baby starts to cry nearby. There's a bond among them that doesn't need words. A knowing glance across a courtyard is sometimes all it takes, and still they keep going. That's the strange part, the resilience of it. The quiet agreement among women that life must go on even if it costs a piece of yourself each time. You see women bury a child one week and cradle a new one the next, as if the heart can stretch and break and stretch again like the bread dough that never quite rises in winter. Midwives are often both revered and suspected. They know too much. They touch too many thresholds between life and death, between body and spirit. Sometimes they're whispered about in the market. Sometimes they're thanked in secret. But always they are needed. Without them, women would have even less. You watch one brew a potion, once muttering under her breath as she stirs crushed bark into hot water. For pain, she says, it smells like wet forest and old iron. You think it might be magic, or maybe just desperation given shape. The church doesn't always approve. Pain, after all, is seen by some as a purification, a punishment, a test. There's a theological debate, never really resolved, about whether easing a woman's suffering during childbirth is defying divine will. That's the thing about theology. It often happens far away from the bleeding floor. You grow older. You learn what it means to carry life and what it means to lose it. Sometimes you wonder if men had to bear children. Would cathedrals be built in honor of midwives instead of saints? Would birthing chairs be made of velvet and gold? Instead, it's you who crouches in the hay gripping a stranger's hand until your knuckles crack. It's you who measures the health of your baby by whether they cry before you do. You dream of daughters, not because they are easier, but because you know the world won't expect them to survive. And sometimes, outliving expectations is the fiercest revenge of all. There is a lullaby. Women hum, one passed down through whispered voices in the dark. No one remembers who wrote it. Maybe no one did. It's just always been there. You hum it too, even when you're not sure if the baby in your arms is breathing. It's a kind of prayer, or maybe a spell. The history books don't say much about these women. You don't get monuments for surviving. There are no stained glass windows showing a peasant mother birthing her 8th child in a smoke-filled cottage. But maybe there should be. Because if courage had a sound, it might be a mother humming over silence. And if history had ears, it might finally listen. It begins with a cough. Soft, scratchy, barely worth noting. But in a medieval world without doctors on call, Even a cough makes the whole household pause. There's no thermometer to check, no pharmacy to visit. Just you and what you remember from your mother and what she remembered from hers. You don't panic yet. You go to the hearth, poke at the ashes, and mutter to yourself about elderflower and mugwort. There's a pouch tucked behind the chimney stones, warm and dry. Inside are crumbled leaves, roots that smell faintly of dirt, and something sharper, and a few threads of dried lavender meant more for comfort than cure. You know what to do, not because you were taught formally, but because survival depends on women like you. Remembering what boiled leaf treats fever, which seed breaks a chill, and when to give up on herbs and start praying. You crush dried yarrow between your fingers and breathe in the scent. The old women say it's good for everything. Wounds, cramps, even bad dreams. But who knows? Maybe it just gives your hands something to do. The truth is, women have always been the first line of defense when the body starts to betray itself. You're not called a healer. You're just the one who notices when the child's cheeks flush too red. You're the one who stays awake all night cooling foreheads with damp cloths. And sometimes you're the one who closes the eyes when the remedies fail. Quietly, so no one has to say what happened. You learned that foxglove can stop a heart and also slow it down. That rosemary might clear a stuffed head, but too much might bring on labor or worse. The balance is never printed in a book, because books aren't written for you. They are kept by monks behind walls you'll never pass. Your library is the hedgerow. Your shelf is the space beneath the table where you dry herbs out of sight. Some of your neighbors are suspicious. A woman who knows too much, they whisper, is a woman to watch. Especially if she's got a charm bag, or never gets sick, or prays too quietly. You've learned not to say too much. Just smile, nod, and offer tea. Still, they come to you. When their own children won't eat. When the bleeding won't stop. When the priest says prayer is enough but their bones say otherwise. They find their way to your threshold, cap in hand, asking for willow bark or something for sleep. And you give it, even if they gossiped yesterday, even if they'll gossip tomorrow. The remedies don't always work. Sometimes they make things worse, but sometimes, just sometimes, they help. The fever breaks. The baby cries again. The old man sleeps through the night without calling out. And that's enough. That's worth everything. You don't wear robes or carry tools of silver, just apron strings and pouches. But you carry knowledge that has outlived kings. You know how to read a tongue without needing a scholar. You can tell a woman's time of the month by the smell of her skin. You can sense when a cough is just a cough, and when it's a bell tolling far too early. Tonight you sit by the fire fingers stained with valerian root, watching the pot bubble gently over coals. The smell is sharp, earthy calming. Outside someone cries. Maybe it's just a fox. Maybe it's something worse. You stir the pot anyway. That's what you do. Stir. Wait. Hope. In your world, health is not guaranteed. Medicine is not certain. And the line between healer and heretic is dangerously thin. So you walk carefully. You keep your mixtures modest. You pretend not to know what you know. And yet behind your quiet gaze lies a catalog of every remedy, every ailment, every life you tried to save. People say women are the weaker sex, but you know better. You've held life in your palms, weighed death in your basket, and kept going anyway, with nothing more than leaves heat and hope, and sometimes a little nettle tea. It makes you wonder if knowledge is power. Why was it so often feared in the hands of women? You don't remember when the first whisper started. Maybe it was after you said no to the bailiff's son when he offered to walk you home. Or maybe it was when someone noticed you gathered herbs by the riverbank alone. You only know that now. When you step outside your door, conversation stalls. Bread sellers turn their heads just a fraction too slow. Children run back to their mothers, not screaming, but looking, watching, as if something about you has turned unfamiliar overnight. There's no trial, no official accusation, just the slow, quiet weathering of your name. You are not arrested, not yet, but you are no longer safe. And there's no one to plead your case, because what would they even be defending you against? No one said the word witch, not aloud, but someone muttered that your cow gave birth to a calf with no tail. And someone else said you were seen reading of all things, something not written by a priest. And so it goes. This is the court of rumor, and in it you have already been judged. In medieval towns, justice often traveled by word of mouth, faster than by parchment or decree, especially for women. You don't own land. You don't have a title. You certainly don't have a lawyer. What you have is your face, your voice, your posture, and all of them can be twisted to fit a story that isn't yours. You make eye contact. That's defiance. You don't. That's guilt. You speak clearly arrogant. You mumble clearly hiding something. It's a trial where silence is never the right answer, but neither is speaking. There's a reason they say women were tried in the streets long before they were ever tried in court, and some trials never make it that far. You remember the story of a woman from 2 villages over. She helped deliver a baby that didn't breathe, and though the mother held her hand and wept, thanks someone outside had seen her walking with a black cat the night before. The baby's death became a curse. The woman's kindness became a spell. And now her cottage sits empty ivy, reclaiming her roof as if nature itself is erasing her from memory. You sweep your own doorstep more often now, not because it needs sweeping, but because you know someone's watching. It's a small act of defense. Look how clean, how orderly, how normal you are. Your firewood is stacked. Your water bucket is full. Your herbs are drying in neat bundles. You're not hiding anything. You wish that mattered. The truth is, suspicion clings to women like chimney soot. Once it's on you, even scrubbing leaves a trace. No one asks how your neighbor's son got better after the fever, not after you brought the elderflower tincture. But they remember the smell of the potion. They remember the way you didn't charge for it. Why wouldn't a healer ask for coin? Maybe because she owed the devil, not the apothecary. These are the kinds of puzzles no one wants solved. They only want to point and nod and feel a little safer because they are not you. There is no handbook for surviving gossip. Only instincts. Keep your head down. Smile, but not too much. Be helpful, but not too capable. Don't walk alone, but also don't be seen with men. Don't be too quiet, but don't raise your voice. Eventually, you learn to live inside the rumor. You wear it like a second cloak, heavier than wool and twice as scratchy. You speak carefully. You laugh less. And still, the rumors grow. What's strange is how quickly these stories move without your consent, how they multiply even while your life shrinks. The more they invent, the less room you have to breathe. And here's the oddest part of all. Sometimes you catch yourself wondering if so many people believe it is a kind of truth. That's the cruelty of it. When a lie is repeated often enough, it doesn't just fool the town. It starts to chip away at the person wearing it. One day, you pass by the blacksmith's daughter, and she doesn't flinch. She looks at you, really looks. And in that moment, you see something flicker across her face, something between fear and admiration. As if the very thing that makes others whisper has made her wonder what power you actually hold. It's tempting, just for a heartbeat, to lean into it. If they're going to call you dangerous, why not be a little dangerous? But you don't. You go home. You feed your hens. You stir your soup. You press lavender between the pages of your mother's old psalter, because no matter what they say, you are not the story they're telling. Or maybe you are, but not the version they've made. You are the one who knows which root eases cramping, which leaf dulls toothache, which chant brings comfort when pain is beyond medicine. You know how to ease death and how to protect the living. That's knowledge, not darkness. But in a world where women's wisdom frightens more than it fascinates, even healing can be twisted into harm. And so, the question lingers, like smoke. If truth can be undone by whispers, what chance does justice really have? Still you go on. You live your life in plain sight and quiet rebellion. You sing while you sweep. You laugh when the moon is full. And you do not stop gathering herbs because someone will need them. Someone always does. You don't need everyone to understand you. Just one or two to believe in you. And until then, you keep moving through a world where innocence is not proof enough, and where a woman's life can be rewritten without ink or parchment, just breath. There's a rhythm to the work that no one outside the cottage ever hears. The soft thump of a shuttle against a wooden loom. The whisper of wool sliding through calloused fingers. The low bubble of a pot steeping herbs over coals. The world beyond may forget your name, but in this room, under the slant of the thatched roof and the scent of dried rosemary, you are very much alive. You are useful. And in a society where usefulness often determines whether you're protected or discarded, that's something close to power. You spend your days doing work that doesn't earn a title. You are not a doctor, but people come to you when their joints ache, when their babies won't stop crying, when the priest shrugs and says, "It must be God's will." You're not a weaver, officially, because guilds are for men with paperwork and fees. But half the village wears your wool, and the other half wishes they could afford it. You're not even called a midwife aloud, not in places where the church watches closely. But the mothers know your name, and that's enough. You are a worker in the shadows, and the shadows are very crowded. There's something ironic about how medieval women were everywhere doing everything, and yet their labor was so often invisible. Not because they were hiding, but because society simply didn't write them down. No one inscribed your name when you patched the linen sheets for the Lord's manor. No one noted it in the town ledgers when you stitched up the butcher's wife after childbirth. You were essential and overlooked, vital and unnamed. It makes you wonder, if something isn't written, does that mean it didn't happen? Or does that mean the wrong people held the pen? Even now, your hands ache with the work, not from one grand heroic act, but from the repetition of 100 small ones. You scrub the herbs between your palms, crushing the leaves just enough to release the oils. The smell of sage mint and mugwort drifts upward. There's a charm stitched into the hem of your apron, small and lopsided, sewn with red thread for protection. You don't talk about it. It's not exactly sanctioned. But then again, neither is most of what you do. In the back of the cottage, a spindle whirs. Your daughter, 12, and clever, is learning to twist flax into thread. You taught her how to sing under her breath to keep time. It's an old song, something your grandmother hummed while sorting onions or mending boots. You're not even sure what the words mean anymore. They're just syllables stitched to survival. You hum along, and the spindle spins like time itself, tight, slow, unbroken. They say work is holy. That labor brings dignity. But holiness, it seems, gets measured differently depending on who's holding the scales. A monk copying manuscripts in the abbey is called scholarly. You copying a salve recipe into the margins of your kitchen wall are called suspicious. He mixes ink and scripture. You mix lard and time. His knowledge becomes legacy. Yours becomes gossip, or worse. And yet you persist, because people need their clothes mended, their stomachs soothed, their babies caught, and no one else is lining up to do it for free. So you whisper your instructions. Boil the root, but not too long. Let the dye sit overnight. Don't trust the bark until it peels easily. You pass the knowledge hand to hand, breath to breath, the way women always have, quietly, cleverly, and mostly without credit. The strangest part is how often you're needed, and how rarely that need translates to respect. A nobleman might sneer at your patched skirts one day, then beg for your help the next when his child runs a fever. There's no apology in his voice, just urgency. And you give him the elderflower tea and the warning to pray, but also to rest the child's head, where it's cool and dark. And when the fever breaks, he says nothing. He won't mention it again. He'll call for the barber surgeon next time, and when that fails, you'll be summoned again. Sometimes you wonder if this counts as power. Not the kind that gets written into laws, but the kind that pulses under the skin of the village, shaping everything quietly. Is there a power in knowing how to stop bleeding with spiderwebs and vinegar, in keeping the children from coughing through the night, in teaching your daughter to twist thread while she sings? Maybe history just hasn't figured out how to measure that kind of strength yet. One winter evening, the mayor's wife comes to you in secret. She brings a bundle of linen and a pale face. She won't say what happened, only that she needs help. You don't ask. You never do. You light the fire. You brew the herbs. You give her a poultice and a place to rest. By morning, she leaves through the back door, her veil pulled low. She never thanks you. But a week later, there's a bolt of fine cloth on your doorstep, blue, dyed with woad, unmistakably expensive. No note, just the cloth. It's not gratitude exactly, but it's recognition. And in your world, that's almost the same thing. You hang it near the window where the morning light catches it. You don't cut into it yet. Maybe you never will. Maybe it's enough just to be reminded that someone remembered what you did, even if no one else ever will. As the fire crackles and the last threads of dusk settle in the rafters, you wrap a shawl around your shoulders and listen to the spindle slow. Your daughter's song trails off. She looks to you. You nod. Another day's work, stitched together by care and instinct and memory, comes to an end. Tomorrow will bring more. The records may never mention your name, but your hands, your voice, your song, they hold up the world in ways parchment could never describe. And perhaps that is the quiet defiance of women like you, to endure, to build to heal, and to carry on even when no one is watching. The hearth is warm tonight, but your heart feels far from it. You are home technically. 4 walls, a roof, a corner to sleep, and a bucket to wash in. But that word home implies comfort, safety, maybe even a sense of belonging. You are not sure you have those things. Not here. Not entirely. You move through your own space, like a guest who overstayed her welcome. The cottage is not unkind, just indifferent. And perhaps that's worse. It's strange how a woman can live her entire life in the same structure and never fully claim it as her own. Your husband owns the land, or his father does, or the Lord above him. You tend the fire, cook the meals, patch the roof, and yet the decisions are made outside your hearing. The field is planted without your say. The grain is sold without your knowledge. You learn of major life events like borrowing a goat or marrying off your daughter by overhearing them at supper. You swallow your questions with your porridge. Still, the rhythms of the home fall on you. You are the one who knows when the stores of barley are running low, or when the child's cough means more than just bad weather. You wake first and sleep last, ears tuned not just for danger, but for disappointment. The creak of the door that came too late, the broken handle no one will fix, the small splinters of frustration that pile like kindling. You speak less these days, but you hear everything. It's not that the men are cruel, at least not all the time. It's just that they don't see the house the same way you do. To them, it is a base, a station, a workshop, a place to pass through and return to. For you, it is a world, a domain with its own moods and rituals and traps. The hearth must be fed like a hungry child. The floors swept like an unspoken apology. Even the thatch above must be checked for birds' nests or leaks, or you'll pay for it when the rains come. And yet for all the work you pour into it, you are lonely. Not the kind of lonely that disappears when someone enters the room. A deeper kind. A loneliness that grows in the space between what you do and what you're allowed to say. Because even surrounded by children and kin and neighbors, your thoughts remain your own. And they press against your ribs, unspoken. You once tried to explain this to a friend, back when you still dared to share such things. She looked at you with kind confusion and said, "But you're lucky. You have a husband." And so, you learned. You learned that loneliness wasn't a complaint that women were allowed to have. You learned that silence was easier, that no one looks for sorrow in a clean home. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you simply walked out, picked up your basket, and walked down the road. Not to run away, just to be somewhere else. For an hour, for a day. But then the bread would burn, and the child would cry, and the chickens would wander into the neighbor's flax patch, and somehow all of that would be your fault. Because a woman absent is always more noticed than a woman present. The walls of your house hold stories, but they don't speak them aloud. A hairpin lodged between the floorboards, a faded outline on the door where a child once marked her height, a scorch mark on the table from that time the pot tipped too far. They are your memories. But memories don't argue for your rights. They don't speak in the village meeting or ask for firewood from the steward. They just settle quietly into dust. At the back of the cottage, you've carved out a small place that's yours. A shelf of herbs, a scrap of embroidery, A spoon you sanded smooth by hand. No one else touches these things. Not because they're forbidden, but because no one else notices them. And maybe that's the point. A space so small that it escapes ownership. Yours because no one else wants it. One evening, as you knead dough, your youngest daughter asks, "Why don't the stories ever have mothers?" You blink. The dough stretches sticky and soft beneath your fingers. You tell her mothers are in the stories, they just don't get their names written down. She frowns. But they do all the work. And there it is. Out of the mouth of a child, the quiet injustice of 100 years. You nod. You sprinkle more flour. You don't answer. Not because you don't have one, but because it would take too long. There is a kind of philosophy that lives in this silence. A question that nudges you sometimes as you sweep or sew, or wait up late beside the fire if you hold a family together without being allowed to lead it. What kind of strength is that? Is it power, disguised as humility? Or is it erasure dressed as duty? And the strangest thing is, you're not bitter. Not exactly. There's a kind of peace that grows in a woman who knows she's invisible but refuses to vanish. You pour it into your stitching, into your cooking, into the bedtime songs no one will ever write down. You leave pieces of yourself in every corner of the house, quiet but persistent, present even in absence. Tonight, as you lie down, the roof creaks its usual lullaby. The wind sighs through the shutters like a memory you're not sure belongs to you. You pull the blanket up and stare at the beams above, worn smooth by time. You wonder if they'll outlast you. Probably. But maybe, just maybe, they'll remember. You wake before the bells. Not because you want to, no one ever truly wants to, but because the rhythm of faith is louder than sleep. The straw mattress scratches your legs as you rise, the cold kissing your toes like a penitential whisper. You mumble the first line of a prayer not out of reverence, perhaps, but out of habit. That's the thing about belief in this age. It's not just in your heart. It's on your lips and your chores, wrapped around your waist like a woolen girdle that scratches and sanctifies all at once. You wash your face in water so cold it feels like penance. Some women in your village take it further, fasting from salt, kneeling for hours, walking barefoot to the edge of reason and back again. They say it's for their souls. You wonder sometimes if it's also for control. After all, there are so few things a woman here gets to decide, but you can choose not to eat, not to speak, not to sleep. That too is a kind of power. A power cloaked in piety. The chapel is dim. Beeswax smoke hovers above the pews like a low fog of old intentions. The priest is already there, half asleep or half holy, it's hard to tell. His Latin rolls over your head like waves you've long stopped trying to understand. You sit. You kneel. You stand. It's a choreography of devotion, one your body knows, even if your mind wanders. And wander it does. You think of your mother lighting a candle every morning, muttering blessings over porridge. You think of your neighbor, who swears the Virgin Mary cured her rash with a look. You think of Sister Aurelia, who once confessed to seeing angels and never spoke again. Here's the funny thing. Faith is not always warm. Sometimes it's cold and exacting. Sometimes it demands too much and offers too little. But it's also what binds you to your neighbors, your ancestors, even your enemies. You don't get to ask if it's true. You only get to ask how well you're following it. And maybe that's the cruelest question of all. By noon, Your stomach growls like an unrepentant heretic. But it's Friday, so there's no meat. Just bitter herbs, black bread, and a thin stew that tastes more of duty than flavor. You chew slowly, not because you're pious, but because you hope stretching the meal might quiet the gnawing. Around you, other women chew in silence. It's the kind of silence that feels practiced, almost holy. Someone once said, though no one remembers who that women are, naturally more spiritual. Maybe it's because they bleed and birth and break without complaint. Or maybe it's because in a world where they have so little faith is the one thing no man can completely take, even if he tries. Later, you find yourself in front of the reliquary, that little wooden box with a saint's finger or tooth inside, though you suspect it might also be a pig's knuckle with a good backstory. Still, you kneel. You light a candle. Not because you believe the bone has power, but because someone might be watching. And even if they aren't, you've come to feel uneasy doing anything else. That's the trick, isn't it? When ritual becomes rhythm, even doubt bows its head. In the corners of your home, tiny crucifixes keep watch. A scrap of cloth said to have touched a martyr's robe dangles near the hearth. The saints live with you like quiet roommates, never quite seen, but always present. You pray to Saint Margaret when the bread won't rise, to Saint Apollonia when your tooth aches, and to Saint Barbara during storms. It's a spiritual economy. If you say the right thing to the right saint at the right hour, maybe your child won't get the cough. Maybe your cow won't die. Maybe your husband will come home sober. No promises, just maybe. And yet amidst all this sacred scaffolding, a quiet question takes root. Is your devotion yours? Or is it something passed down, like an old dress, mended, worn thin, and expected to fit? When a man prays, they say he's wise. When a woman prays, they say she's obedient. The Lord may love both, but the ledger of the world tends to balance very differently. The sun begins to dip, and with it comes Vespers. You don't rush. You know the lines by heart. You know which psalm comes next and when to bow your head. But your mind drifts again to the little girl who asked if God had a mother, to the old widow who burned her hand cooking for the monks and called it a blessed suffering. To yourself as a girl, wondering if your whispered questions would ever echo back with answers. Tonight, you'll lay down on straw that still smells faintly of summer grass. You'll cross yourself. You'll say the same prayer your mother said and her mother before her. You'll wonder, just before sleep, if they ever thought to change the words. Or if they too believed that surviving in this world required not just faith in God, but in the quiet strength of repetition. Because belief for women like you is more than a Sunday robe or a holy day. It is the long patience of lighting a candle while the world burns quietly around you. It's sowing blessings into hymns, whispering prayers over steaming pots, keeping vigil with a heart that never quite stops asking, even when the mouth does. And maybe that's where the true sanctity lives, not in the relics or the rituals, but in the persistence of it all. In choosing to hope again and again that some divine ear is still listening, even if it only hears you when you're silent. You are here, scrubbing the same stone floor your grandmother once walked across, beneath the same beams that groan like tired elders each time the wind shifts. You are here, but you wouldn't know it if you ever opened a book about this century. Your name, your mother's name, Your neighbor's stories, all missing, not forgotten, just never considered worth writing down. Take the village scribe, for example, a man with crooked fingers and sharper ink. He records the price of oxen, the Lord's latest tax, and how many barrels of salted herring were carted through town last week. But not the woman who salted them, or the one who carried the fish from the boat to the barrel, or the one who patched the nets with her fingers so numb she could thread a needle by touch alone. Your work is visible until it isn't. It dissolves like steam off boiling broth, leaving only the faintest scent behind. They say history is written by the victors, but more often it's written by men with leisure time and access to parchment. And if you're not a queen, a scandal, or the subject of a sermon, you're simply left out. That doesn't mean you weren't there. It just means the quill didn't tilt your way. Even the church records, those holy ledgers so obsessed with order, only remember women by their relationships to others. Wife of, daughter of, widow. Rarely do they note the name of the healer who delivered babies in the back of smoky cottages, or the brewer whose ale kept the whole town from scowling. And here's a question worth pondering just before sleep. If someone isn't written into history, does that mean they didn't matter? Or does it mean that those who held the pens couldn't imagine their lives worth preserving? It's not just the peasants, mind you. Even noble women whose lives were embroidered in silk and worry are reduced to footnotes beside their husband's deeds. She bore him 6 sons. She died of fever. She gave generously to the abbey. That's it. As though those offerings of flesh, of time, of faith were details too ordinary to deserve elaboration. You pause at the doorframe, holding a worn cloth that used to be part of your mother's wedding veil, now repurposed for dusting. You think of her hands and how they were always busy. Darning, mending, pinching herbs, pinching cheeks. None of that is in the records either. But someone had to carry history on hips, in baskets, through birth and bread and burial. Women bore it silently, like the sky bears stars never mentioned in the charts unless one happened to fall. Even in illuminated manuscripts, those brilliant books, where saints glow and kings point at maps, women are mostly scenery. They stand near fountains. They kneel in chapels. They carry jugs. Always carrying something, never the narrative. And yet, in the margins, they sometimes appear more vividly drawn in the quiet corners of pages by bored monks. A nun chasing a snail, a maiden swatting a bishop, a kitchen girl riding a goose. These were not official stories, but someone somewhere remembered you with a wink, and that counts for something. Tonight, you think about all the stories you've carried that no one will ever ask about. The time you hid your brother's fever from the steward to keep him from being cast out. The song you made up to stop your baby from crying when your own mother had no lullabies left in her. The look your sister gave you when she saw your bruised wrist and didn't ask, just held it. No scroll holds these moments. No chronicle dares to tell them. But history isn't always written in ink. Sometimes it's kneaded into bread, stitched into seams, whistled between chores, passed from hand to hand like a warm stone. The irony, of course, is that the men who wrote the records relied on the world women sustained. Their ink was black because women boiled the soot. Their robes were clean because someone else scrubbed the river silt out of wool. Their peace was held together by the daily invisible labor of women who never called themselves historians, but remembered everything anyway. So the next time you hear someone quote a medieval law or brag about a battle, remember for every knight who rode off to war, there was someone who patched his tunic. For every monk who copied a gospel, there was someone who kept his fire stoked and his broth from burning. And while the history books may leave your name out, the walls remember. The pots you scrubbed remember. The ground remembers the weight of your footsteps. The air holds the echo of your hum. One day, someone might look into the gaps and start asking better questions. Who baked the bread while the town held its council? Who told the children stories when the fathers were gone? Who stood in the fields, back bent, while the sky stitched thunder overhead? And maybe that someone will remember to write it down. But for now, you rest. You've earned it more times than anyone could count. You've never said the word love out loud, not the way they say it in stories, with fireworks and music and twirling in moonlight. You've said things like, "I'll bring you the good honey next market day," or "Careful the door creaks when you push it open too fast." That's the kind of love a medieval woman knows, wrapped in practicality and risk, tucked beneath veils and routines. The truth is, love wasn't something you were supposed to have. Affection, maybe, if you were lucky. Obedience, always. A husband was chosen for you often by someone who cared more about wheat fields and dowry chests than your feelings. Love, as we understand it now, was considered a bit suspicious. Passion made people reckless. Recklessness led to scandal. And scandal, scandal, could ruin entire generations of reputation in one goose-feathered whisper. Still, there are always cracks in the system. And where there are cracks, something soft manages to bloom. A glance across the church aisle. A pressed flower, left where only one person would find it. A borrowed book, its margins lined with small ink hearts that no one could admit to drawing. You learn early on that love is not shouted, it is embroidered. Stitched in secret onto sleeves and handkerchiefs, in little coded messages only two people in the village can read. A red thread for longing, a looped knot for meeting after vespers, a single gold stitch, scandalous but subtle, for something that might almost be called devotion. And if you live in a convent, the rules don't necessarily change. They just become more elaborate. You've seen Sister Odila hide notes beneath the wafers. You've heard the soft coughs exchanged between cloister walls. You've noticed how two women can spend an entire winter weaving tapestries side by side without saying much, but their fingers always move in harmony. That, too, is a kind of love. The church says love is divine, but the kind they bless is tidy, authorized, productive. Your kind of love is none of those things. It doesn't produce heirs or alliances. It doesn't come with property. It comes with waiting and risk. And a very good memory, because letters get burned and meetings are fleeting. Let's not pretend it's all romance and candlelight. Sometimes it's just loneliness in disguise. Sometimes it's desperation. Someone who notices that your braid is looser today, or that your sigh means more than the usual weariness. But even so, it's a connection. And connection in a world that rarely gives women a moment to themselves is something sacred. Of course, the penalties for being caught are as creative as they are cruel. A woman found inappropriate with someone not her husband, or with another woman, or with a man beneath her station, might find herself shaved bald and paraded through town, or locked away, or simply erased. No one writes about her again. No one says her name. This raises a quiet little question. How many love stories never made it to parchment? If women's lives were footnotes, in the best of times, what happened to their secrets, their longings, their heartaches? Some scholars say that's why medieval literature is so full of anonymous poems. Maybe they were written by women. Maybe they were messages passed like folded corners of truth, disguised as fiction or song. Maybe all those uncredited verses were the only safe way to say, I remember you. You lie in your straw bed at night and think about the ways women tried to speak without being heard. The songs sung at spinning wheels. The lullabies that carried more feeling than they let on. The tiny carvings on the underside of wooden spoons. Nothing direct, nothing dangerous. But if you knew where to look, it was all there. The oddest love token you've ever heard, of a woman who gave her lover a baked apple filled with herbs from her mother's garden. Not because it tasted good, but because she knew he'd remember her every time he smelled rosemary. Practical and poetic. The perfect blend of medieval affection. And then there's the reality of physical distance. Love had to stretch across seasons. You'd go weeks, months, even years without seeing the person you adored. You'd rely on rumors, hope, maybe a message sent through a merchant's wife who owed you a favor. And yet sometimes the bond held, despite everything, despite logic. Which brings us to a scholarly headache. Can love survive without proof? If we don't have their letters, their names, their portraits, do their feelings still count? Historians can argue about that in universities. But in the quiet hours, you know the answer. It counted. It always did. You stir the fire gently and watch the coals glow like secrets. You think about all the love stories that happened in places no one was looking beside the grain mill behind the altar at the edge of the woods. You think about how much of women's history is written not in ink, but in glances and gestures and risks taken with quiet hearts. And as the wind tugs at the shutters and your blanket wraps tighter around your knees, you know this much. Not every love story needs a witness to be real. Sometimes, just surviving long enough to remember it is the only testament it ever needed. You're sweeping the dirt floor again. Not because it needs it honestly, it never stops needing it, but because it's one of the few things that lets your mind drift without guilt. The bristles scrape over packed earth, scattering yesterday's ashes and tomorrow's hopes, and somewhere from the back corner of the cottage, someone chuckles. It's not a loud laugh. Medieval laughter rarely is. Not when walls or thin ears are everywhere, and your husband's temper is closer than the village shrine. But it's still a laugh, a quiet, wheezy snort from your neighbor who just told you the story of a woman in the next village who convinced the local priest that she'd been cursed with dancing demons purely to get out of scrubbing the church floors in Lent. She got 3 weeks off and a goat. You both laugh again, not because it's truly funny, but because it's the kind of joke that tastes like freedom, however fleeting. The kind you whisper while kneading dough or milking a cow. The kind passed from grandmother to granddaughter like a secret recipe. Humor isn't entertainment here. It's not a pastime. It's a coping mechanism with muddy shoes and a sharp tongue. That's the thing they forget when writing those solemn histories, the ones full of kings and saints and battles and famine. They forget the jokes, the muttered sarcasm, the clever nicknames for unpleasant in-laws, the tiny rebellions tucked into rhymes and riddles. Your people don't have much, but by heavens, they have jokes. One of the most famous, though not famous enough to get its own illuminated manuscript, is the tale of the woman who trained her hens to peck only when her mother-in-law started talking. Some say it was witchcraft. Others say it was brilliant timing. Either way, it's a story that survived not in scripture, but in cider-soaked evenings and market stalls whispered between grins. Laughter is dangerous, of course, especially when it points upward toward the Lord's Son who can't ride a horse without falling off, or the friar whose robes are suspiciously fine for someone so devout. But women have always known how to aim it sideways, toward the absurd, toward each other. You don't laugh to be cruel. You laugh to survive. And so, in the absence of rites of rest of reason, you rhyme. You recite silly verses about lazy husbands and miracle turnips. You hum a song about a pig who outsmarts a merchant. You teach your daughter the phrase as useful as a bishop in a blizzard, and watch her smirk the first time she says it aloud. Because in a world where your opinion doesn't matter, your wit still might. You might not be allowed to preach, to read, or to vote, but no one can stop you from saying under your breath, "Well, if heaven's full of monks like that, I might take my chances with purgatory. Sometimes it's all you have." But does laughter count as resistance? That's the academic debate, isn't it? Is it rebellion to roll your eyes behind your veil? Is a joke a weapon, or just a balm? Can a rhyme about a nosy neighbor count as cultural inheritance? The scholars can't agree, but your bones tell you yes, because that's the only way your sanity survives the turnips, the sermons, and the 73 chores before dusk. You remember when your cousin made the midwife laugh so hard she dropped her herbs into the fire. That moment of chaos of pure, startled laughter was worth more than the herbs. Or when you hit a frog in your brother's boot after he tried to marry you off to a traveling relic seller. He didn't find it funny, but your sisters did, and you still giggle thinking about the scream. These are the moments that stitch your days together. Not the milestones, but the mischief. Not the rules, but the little ways you bend them. There's a game women play in your village quietly beneath the surface. Who can say the cheekiest thing without getting caught? Who can impersonate the abbot's voice most convincingly? Who dares to name the Lord's dog after his mistress? You don't always win, but when you do, the prize is laughter. And in a life built on repetition and rules, laughter feels like magic. Even your grandmother, who hasn't smiled since St. Hubert's feast 3 years ago, let out a half snort when someone said the new priest had a face like a fasting goat. No one remembers who said it, but they remember the sound it made. So when you lie down tonight under scratchy wool and a leaky thatch roof, you won't remember the chores or the sore feet. You'll remember the moment earlier when your neighbor lifted her skirt just enough to show you that she had stitched a tiny smiley face into her petticoat right where the priest couldn't see it. And you'll giggle like a girl at the fair, because sometimes survival isn't about strength or strategy. Sometimes it's about knowing the right moment to laugh. You don't have a name etched in marble or a statue in the cloister courtyard. No one illuminated your story into a gilded manuscript. No poet sang your life in courtly verse, and your face is nowhere to be found on a chapel window. But still, you remain. You're there, in the salt rubbed into the rim of the bread dough, in the knots of wool spun tight under candlelight, in the lullaby, hummed not for beauty, but to keep the crying down, so the baby might sleep, and so might you. This is what legacy looks like for most medieval women, Not grand, not loud, not carved in Latin, but persistent, woven into habits, embedded in muscle memory, passed on, not with declarations, but with hands guiding other hands. You don't write history, you bake it, stitch it, grind it, carry it, bury it. It lives in the rhythm of what gets done, day after day, rain or frost or hunger be damned. The chroniclers forget you. The parchment skips your name. But the people around you would notice instantly if you were gone. There's a strange kind of tenderness in this invisibility. It's not romantic. It's not noble. But it's quiet, strong, and constant. A loaf rising in the dark corner of a hearth. A poultice wrapped around a swollen ankle. A way of plaiting hair that no one taught, but everyone knows. You're part of the knowledge that doesn't need to be written to survive. And sometimes it survives longer because it wasn't written, because it lived in the daily, the unspectacular, the indispensable. You tell stories, of course. You always have. They're not written down, but they run like veins through your evenings. You pass them along with a smirk or a sigh, like the tale of the woman who scared off tax collectors by convincing them she was married to a ghost, or the midwife who secretly taught 3 girls to read Latin using a broken psalter and an old spoon as a pointer. True or not, it doesn't matter. These are your archives. These are your inheritance. And your resistance? It lives there too. Not in rebellion, but in endurance. Not in protest, but in persistence. You don't shout back. You keep working. You do the thing that needs doing. You remember. You adapt. You tuck the real knowledge where no one will think to look in a rhyme and a recipe in the way your daughter learns to stand when a man enters the room. That's the trick. Not everything that survives history is loud. Some of it is stubborn, and some of it is you. It's tempting to think history is what gets written. That if no one records it, it didn't happen. But you know better. You know that memory doesn't need parchment. It needs mouths, ears, kitchens, firesides. Someone saying, "This is how she used to do it." Someone humming your song while scrubbing the floor. Someone passing on your knowledge with a wink and a warning and a whisper. That's how you last. And you do last, not always by name, but by habit. Your hand is in the way the linen gets folded, the way the herbs are hung to dry. Your voice echoes in how the baby's cradle is rocked. And your survival, not just of famine, childbirth, heartbreak, but of being erased, is your loudest legacy of all. Here's the funny part, though. Sometimes the things you left behind are considered too ordinary to be worth recording, too domestic, too soft. But those things are the bones of the world. The bread you made kept people standing. The stitches you sewed kept skin warm. The stories you whispered taught more than any sermon, and yet they called it women's work as if that made it smaller, as if survival was ever small. And so we come to the question, if a woman's story is never written down, is it still history, or is it something else? Folklore, superstition, anecdote, does it matter what we call it? If it still shapes how we live, love, eat, pray, or are the categories themselves the problem? As if only kings make history, and you just make soup. Maybe history needs a wider lens, one that sees the value in a warm crust, in a healing tincture, in a song that softens grief. One that knows not all power comes with a title. One that recognizes the quiet authority of the women who outlasted every famine and still remembered to feed others. You've seen generations go by. You've buried babies. You've grown old before anyone noticed. You've outlived laws that thought they could contain you. And still, you laugh. Still, you sing. Still, you make the broth and tuck the corners in, and notice when the sky smells like snow. That's a kind of miracle. Not the kind anyone builds a shrine to, but maybe they should, because without you the world doesn't hold. It frays. It forgets. It stops rising in the bowl. So, no, there's no monument. No stained glass window with your likeness. But someone still folds the dough just so. Someone still adds a sprig of rue to the stew. Someone still says, "My grandmother used to do it this way." And that is forever. The chapel is cold. It always is. Stone doesn't warm, no matter how many candles flicker, or how many Ave Marias echo off its walls. And yet, here you are again, kneeling on flagstones that know your bones better than your own mother ever did. You whisper prayers like breathing, not because you expect divine intervention, but because it's what you've always done. It's what your mother did. It's what every woman in this village does when the bread doesn't rise, the fever won't break, or the piglet is born wrong. This isn't piety, it's pattern. You don't ask too many questions. Not allowed anyway. But you wonder sometimes why your faith has to hurt. Why it's not enough to love God, you have to bleed for Him. The priest talks of suffering as a ladder to heaven. You've seen too many women climbing it with splinters in their knees and no shoes on their feet. Some of them fall before they reach the second rung. But they die with rosaries clutched in white-knuckled fists, and everyone says they went to a better place. You suppose it must be warmer there. There are rules, of course. There are always rules. Don't speak in Mass unless spoken to. Don't sing too loud or too soft. Don't sit before the priest does. Don't look a monk in the eye. And if your veil slips, cover your head quickly and repent. The body is a danger, you're told. Yours especially. Temptation wrapped in homespun. It's a peculiar logic to be both unworthy and responsible for every man's downfall. You try not to think too hard about that, or at least not where anyone can hear. You fast on Fridays. You skip meat for weeks during Lent. You kneel until your knees go numb. And once Sister Winifred told you numbness was a gift, it meant God was holding your pain. You weren't sure whether to be comforted or slightly alarmed, but you smiled because that's also what you do. Faith, after all, isn't just about belief. It's about performance, knowing when to nod, when to bow, when to weep without making noise. Sometimes you think about the saints, not the soft ones with lilies and glowing halos, but the ones who walked barefoot on snow or wore chains under their dresses. There's a strange power in them. They were women who said no to marriage, to comfort, to warmth itself. Some chopped off their hair. Some poked out their own eyes to avoid being married off. And somehow, they became holy, revered, remembered. You wonder what it would take for your pain to count like that. But holiness has a hierarchy. You're at the bottom. Not quite a nun, not quite a laywoman. Just a humble soul, doing your best not to offend heaven or your mother-in-law. You have no relics, no confession booth, no one to absolve you of doubts you never dare to voice. You just keep going, washing altar linens, avoiding eye contact with statues that seem to watch, chanting psalms in a language you half understand, hoping God knows what your heart means. And still, there's something oddly comforting in the rituals, in the candles you light for the dead, in the way incense curls like a sigh around your head, in the silence between verses where maybe someone is listening. You don't need miracles. You just need the strength to make it through another season without breaking. And sometimes faith gives you that, or at least the illusion of it. And maybe illusions are enough when the real world is so stingy with kindness. You've seen women believe with ferocity, women who walk miles barefoot to hear Mass, who offer their only egg for the Easter altar, who pray for their husbands not to beat them again, who thank God when He doesn't. Is that faith or desperation? You're not sure. And you're not allowed to ask, not in those words. But you do wonder, if suffering makes you holy, does joy make you sinful? The priests say, penance is cleansing, that God loves the humble, that the meek shall inherit the earth. You scrub floors with that hope. You accept less with that promise. You give more than you have, because someone once said, heaven is built on sacrifice. You just wish it came with better instructions, or at least softer kneelers. But still, you sing. Not always for God, but for yourself. You hum while stirring the pot, while brushing your daughter's hair, while mending socks by the fire. Little songs, not in Latin, but in your mother's tongue. Songs about breadbirds, babies, and bees. They're not sacred, but they're yours. And maybe that's a kind of faith too. The kind that lives in the belly, and the cradle, and the broom. Because in the end, what is devotion, if not repetition? The lighting of the same candle, the saying of the same prayer, the survival of the same woman who's been told she is less, but acts like she is enough anyway. Not because she believes she's a saint, but because she believes her children need supper. And that perhaps is the holiest reason of all. History, they say, is written by the victors. But sometimes it's just written by men with ink-stained fingers and no interest in the kitchen, the cradle, or the quiet wisdom of those who never marched into battle. That's the real trouble, isn't it? You can stir 1,000 pots, birth 12 children, mend every sock in the parish, and still you vanish from the page. Not a name, not a footnote, just silence. Your world is filled with women. They bake, they bind wounds, they remember which herb soothes a fever, and which one might accidentally end a pregnancy if steeped too long. They whisper stories to their children and trade gossip like currency. They are everywhere. But open a scroll, a codex, a finely scripted manuscript, and it's as if they never existed. Unless, of course, they were burned at the stake or crowned with gold. Sometimes you imagine what history would look like if it had been written by your grandmother. Not the one with the rosary and the stern eyebrows, but the one who knew how to gut a fish with her eyes closed. Her version of history would include how to keep bread from going moldy too fast, how to spot a liar by how he holds his mug, how to survive a marriage arranged when you still had milk teeth. Her margins would be full of sighs and recipes, not battles. You've heard stories, of course, of Hildegard, who wrote music and medicine while cloistered away, of Christine de Pizan, who dared to say women had minds. But even they are rare like constellations in an overcast sky. Most women like you, peasants, crafters, midwives, mothers are ghosts with calloused hands. Their knowledge passed mouth to mouth, heart to hand, never ink to page. And when they die, that wisdom risks dying too, unless someone remembers. But memory is fickle. It favors the loud, the wealthy, the sword-bearing. You, on the other hand, learn to keep stories tucked behind your teeth. You learn to listen more than speak, to serve more than be served, and to write nothing down unless it's a recipe you pass to your daughter on a bit of birch bark. Even then, you warn her to keep it hidden, because sometimes knowledge makes you suspect, and suspicion for a woman is a dangerous perfume. You've seen the town scribe. He never asks women their names. He records births, deaths, tithes always, the father's name, never the mother's milk, as if the baby just appeared in swaddling cloth. No sweat, no scream, no lullaby. The ledger is clean, clinical, male. And history, in its fine calligraphy, reflects that same gaze, one that looks past you as if you were smoke. But you are not smoke. You are fire in disguise. Still, even fire can go unseen when it's small and steady. And so, you keep the embers glowing in the quilt pattern passed from mother to daughter in the lullaby. Your niece hums without knowing it came from your great-grandmother in the way you turn garlic 3 times before boiling it for your husband's cough. No one writes this down, but it lasts. That's its own kind of ink. Now and then, someone does try to write a woman down. A monk scribbles about a local healer, calls her either a saint or a witch, depending on whether his rash went away. A nobleman records the name of a serving girl, not for her kindness, but for scandal. A poet writes about his muse never bothering to ask her opinion on rhyme. It's flattering, you suppose, and also infuriating. So you make peace with invisibility, sort of. Because even if your name doesn't grace the cathedral walls or the kingdom's archives, you know it lives in the grain of the bread your children bake, in the rhythm of your daughter's hands as she needs, in the way your granddaughter curses under her breath exactly like you do. That's legacy, not carved in stone, but etched in habits. You sometimes wonder if all the unnamed women were to rise up from history at once, how loud would their footsteps be? Would they shake the libraries? Would they echo in the halls of kings? Or would they simply walk back to the hearth and start boiling water? Because dinner still needs making, whether you're remembered or not. And yet maybe you don't need a statue or a scroll. Maybe you just need to be felt. In the quiet, in the care, in the unspoken resilience that travels through generations like a whispered spell. Maybe that's the kind of history that really matters. Not the kind that's written, but the kind that's lived. Love in your world is something you fold into corners, tuck behind the curtain, stir into the stew when no one is looking. It is not the stuff of poetry, unless it's tragic. It is certainly not shouted from rooftops or carved into tree trunks. No love in your world is a quiet pulse hidden beneath obligation, stitched carefully between the hem of your veil and the crease of your silence. You were never taught to expect it. That's not what marriage is for. Marriage is for land, for sheep, for alliance, sometimes for forgiveness of a family debt. You may not even see your husband's face until the feast day, but you're expected to honor him, obey him, lie beside him, even when your heart beats for someone who milks cows 2 doors down. There are rules, of course, so many rules, about where your eyes may linger, about when you may walk unchaperoned, about what a blush might mean if seen by the wrong gossip. In towns and cloisters alike, the walls have ears, and they usually belong to someone's aunt. So you learn the art of secret love, the way to say everything without saying a word. The glance held 2 seconds longer than it should be. The shared ladle at the soup pot. The flower left just inside the chapel door. And the letters. Oh, the letters, folded into the seam of a bread loaf hidden under a chicken's bedding, delivered with the herbalist's basket of time. A line of clumsy Latin, or a poem stolen from a monk's sermon, anything to say I see you. I remember. Sometimes it's returned. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's burned before it's read. And still, you keep writing. In the convents, it's trickier. You might find yourself drawn to a fellow sister. Not with scandal, but with something deeper intimacy born of hours, kneeling side by side hands, brushing during embroidery dreams, whispered after compline. There's a kind of ache in that bond one that has no place in the rule of Saint Benedict. So it lives between the lines, in a shared laugh over lentils, in a glance across the cloister. It's holy but unspoken, tender but forbidden. And if you're caught, well, that depends. On your social status, on your family's name, on whether the priest had his breakfast that morning. The punishments are many, but most often they begin with shame. Public or private, the lesson is clear. Women's love must be useful. Anything else is wasteful or wicked. So women get clever. You've seen it. You've done it. You pass gossip as cover. You pretend to pray while watching. You invent errands that lead you past the field where he's thatching hay. You keep your veil low, your voice lower, and your heart, well, you learn to carry that quietly, like a secret bundle beneath your shawl. Does it always end in heartbreak? Not always. Some secrets stay sweet. Some become lifelong companionships, folded into the rhythm of daily life, never acknowledged aloud, but felt in every shared breath. Others are lost like wildflowers, trampled under duty. That's the thing about medieval love. It's rarely written, but it's everywhere. In the sighs of women waiting at wells, in the tears of girls betrothed too young, in the jokes shared in bakeries, and the silences shared in stables. And no, the scribes don't record it. They don't care for stories of feelings that don't serve the crown or the church. They write of dowries of alliances of scandal if it's juicy enough, but never of longing, never of the ache of a woman's heart as she watches someone ride away and smiles anyway. Still the love endures, in memory, in the herbs you plant, in the bread you knead, in the song you hum that once made someone's eyes light up. History forgets, but your hands remember. Your body remembers. And so, love lives. So you whisper it to the walls, to the wind, to the space beside you on the straw mattress where no one knows what dreams you keep. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the truest things were never meant to be read, only lived. You are not alone, and yet you often feel that way, not because you live without people. Your cottage is small, but full of life. Children, cousins, neighbors always passing through. But there is a solitude that wraps around your shoulders like a damp shawl, the kind that comes not from emptiness, but from being unheard. From speaking and knowing your words will never be written down, not in any scroll, not in any priest's record. From having thoughts that stay in your chest like birds in a locked cage. You are in your own home. You stir the pot. You sweep the floor. You light the fire. And still decisions float above your head, just out of reach like apples too high on the tree. The land belongs to your husband. The church belongs to the men who preach. Even your own name can be replaced. Daughter of wife of mother of. Your titles are borrowed, never truly yours. Sometimes You sit on the step outside and watch the chickens pecking at nothing. And in that moment, you wonder if they had more words. Would they use them better than we do? Because people here speak often and loudly, but rarely say what they mean, least of all to you. There's a phrase you hear. Often she's got a tongue on her. It's not meant kindly. It's what they say when a woman refuses to stay quiet about things that matter. So most of you stay quiet and wait and sigh and laugh softly into the back of your hand when no one is watching. There is comfort in silence, but there is also danger. A dangerous thought. If your home is not a place where your voice matters, is it still a home? You think of your grandmother. She had a strong voice, even when her back bent and her eyes faded. She whispered stories while she shelled beans. Stories with no knights or dragons, just clever women outwitting petty men. You remember one in particular, a tale of a girl who trained a fox to steal letters from the Lord's courier, then rewrote them before sending them back. Was it true? No one ever said. But oh, how you loved that girl. You still do. Your daughter asks you one night why the priest only listens to men. You pause too long before answering. You lie, of course. Something about tradition, about God's will. But she is not convinced. Neither are you. There's a neighbor down the lane, Lucette, who once tried to join the town council when a seat opened. They laughed. Not cruelly, just dismissively. That's somehow worse. Like being told, it's cute that you tried. Now she keeps bees and talks to them more than people. You think she's onto something. Some days, your body aches not from labor, but from invisibility. From carrying the weight of things you can't name. From biting your tongue so often it feels like a second meal. And yet, you endure. You find tiny rebellions. You season the stew differently than your husband likes. You teach your daughter to read in secret with a scrap of parchment you pretend is just for prayers. You hum songs your mother wasn't supposed to know. These things are small, but they are yours. The hearth glows tonight. A soft orange like a tired candle that refuses to go out. You sit beside it, darning socks again, and you think maybe power isn't always loud. Maybe it's quiet like this, like a stitch holding a seam together, like a spoon scraping the last of the barley from the pot, like breath in the darkness, steady and sure. You know other women feel it too. That quiet shared understanding, a glance across the market, a nod at the well, words passed in low tones behind bread stalls. You speak in silences. You build sisterhoods without ceremonies. You find ways to be heard even when no one is listening. No, you are not alone, and one day, someone will write about you. Not by name, not with titles or fame, but in the shape of a story, in the pattern of a shawl, in the notes of a lullaby passed from lips to cradle. They may not know your name, but they will feel your presence. You are the quiet within the storm. You are the hearth when the fire dies low. You are the hand that keeps the world from unraveling. And no matter how little say you had in your own house, you've left your voice somewhere in someone forever. The road is not paved, not for you, not for anyone really, but especially not for a woman carrying a bundle of firewood, a jug of vinegar, and 3 generations of expectations. Each step along this uneven track is a lesson in balance of weight of duty, of never spilling a single drop, even as the wind tugs at your skirt like a stubborn child. You walk like this every week, to the mill, to the bakehouse, to the cottage with a sick baby where the mother hasn't smiled in days. That's your job now. Or maybe it always was. You aren't paid in coin, but you are paid in warm thanks, in leftover barley, in whispered blessings, and once memorably in an egg that was still warm from the chicken. You try not to think about how much your feet hurt, because frankly, they've been hurting since you were 12 and first sent to fetch water on a frostbitten morning. You try not to count your chores, because numbers lead to questions, and questions lead to resentment, and resentment, well, that's a luxury, like honey, or sleep. Somewhere between the thatched cottage and the main road, a familiar rooster struts out like he owns the whole village. You sidestep him. He glares at you anyway. That rooster has survived 3 harsh winters, 2 foxes, and 1 poorly aimed throwing shoe. You suspect he's immortal, or at least blessed by some minor saint of poultry. You pause at the footbridge just long enough to catch your breath. The water below is shallow and brown, but still manages to reflect the sky with a kind of stubborn poetry. You remember vaguely being told that women shouldn't linger outdoors too long. It invites gossip, and gossip invites consequences. But your knees need this moment, and frankly, so does your spirit. Medieval society has rules for everything: what you wear, when you speak, who you marry, what you own. Spoiler, usually nothing, and what you're supposed to believe. It's not enough to survive. You must survive properly, quietly, gracefully, without drawing too much attention, unless it's praise for your piety or your pie crusts. The truth is, most women live between the lines of official history. You are the ink that doesn't dry on the scroll, the margin note that got rubbed out by time. Your work holds up the world, yet no one seems to write it down. Unless, of course, you do something scandalous. Then they scribble furiously. You carry herbs in your apron. You know how to make poultices and infusions and things that taste terrible but stop people from dying. Sometimes. You learned this from your grandmother, who learned it from her mother, and so on in a line stretching back beyond memory. You call it common sense. The church sometimes calls it something else. Dangerous things women with knowledge. Especially when that knowledge isn't written in Latin. There's a widow on the hill who talks to birds. People leave her small gifts in exchange for tokens tied with colored thread. No one admits it out loud, of course. But on certain nights, the line to her door is longer than the line to the priest's. You once asked her why people came. She smiled and said, "Because hope travels faster in whispers than sermons." It's curious, isn't it, how power when held by a man becomes sacred, but when held by a woman becomes suspicious. You reach the churchyard just as the bell tolls. Not for a service, no, for time. The bell rings every hour, a reminder that the day is not yours. It belongs to the sun, the land, the Lord, and the Lord of the land. Your time is borrowed and due back with interest. At the gate, a young girl with smudged cheeks watches you pass. She mimics your walk. You smirk. She giggles. And just like that, you remember what inheritance really is. Not land, not titles, but patterns, gestures, strength passed quietly between the generations, like yeast in a lump of dough. You nod at her. She nods back, solemn now. She understands something, even if she doesn't have the words yet. This right here is how women survive. Not with swords or scrolls, but with hands that never stop moving, eyes that see everything, and hearts that carry entire villages, even when no one notices. And still, there's space for wonder, for humor, for sly defiance. You once stitched a message into a hymn. Nothing grand, just a tiny line of thread that read, "I am still here." It made you laugh for days. That's the truth behind survival in your world. Not just endurance, but presence. Holding on to moments of self, even when the world insists you disappear. You take the longer path home just for the quiet and the sky, and the way the wind weaves through the trees like a lullaby sung in reverse. There is peace here, not the kind you're told to pray for, but the kind you carve out of exhaustion and fill with fragments of joy. So tonight, when the fire burns low and your body folds itself into sleep like a worn quilt, you'll remember the feel of your footsteps on that dirt road, the immortal rooster, the girl at the gate. You'll remember that you existed fully even in the shadows of history. And maybe that's enough. There are no portraits of you, no statues, no stained glass, no names carefully carved into marble. And yet you persist. In the folds of linen, in the smell of yeast, in the 1,000 invisible labors that hold a village together like hidden stitches in a cloak. You do not need monuments. You are legacy in motion. Tonight, the sky is particularly dark. Not ominous, just heavy, like a wool blanket draped over the stars. You like it that way. The darkness is kinder than the daylight, less demanding. By moonlight, no one expects you to smile, or nod, or carry things that weigh more than your thoughts. You are mending again. Of course you are. A hem that's come loose a tear near the underarm socks, with holes too shy to admit their existence. Your needle is small, but your patience is vast. And so you sit, head bowed like a monk in contemplation, restoring what others might discard. They say women are the keepers of the hearth. But really, you are the archivists of resilience. Each patch, each reinforcement, each silent repair, these are your manuscripts. There's a philosophical question, whispered among the few women who dare to think aloud. If a woman's work disappears the moment it's done, does that mean it never existed? Or is that the very definition of existence fleeting necessary, never praised? Your hands know the answer, even if your mouth never speaks it. Earlier today, you saw old Matilda laughing with her mouth wide open. She was picking turnips. Her teeth are long gone. Her laugh sounds like the wind through reeds. But you've never seen a queen wear her joy more regally. No crown could match the kerchief she wears with such pride. She told you a story about a goose and a miracle and a man who accidentally shaved off half his beard while drunk on fermented beet water. You couldn't stop laughing. Neither could she. That's the medicine no one talks about. The kind that comes without tinctures or blessings, just ridiculous, unexpected joy. You wonder sometimes if historians will ever find these moments. If they'll see laughter as resistance, mirth as muscle, a well-timed joke as the final thread holding the tapestry together. They probably won't. They'll find parchments and laws and grain records. But they'll miss the night you and your sister made up a song about the priest's lopsided hat. Or the time you hit a frog in your cousin's shoe and he screamed like a bishop at confession. That, too, is survival. And it's rarely footnoted. Tonight the fire is steady. Not strong, not weak, just enough to make shadows dance across the beams. You imagine them as ancestors, women who came before, women who stir soup in eternity, who spin thread in the afterlife, who smirk at your mending and say, "That'll hold. Good job." You speak to them sometimes. not with words, but with motions. You tuck the corners of the blanket the way your mother did. You braid your hair like your aunt, long gone, but still alive in your fingers. You hum lullabies whose words you've forgotten, but whose melody knows your bones. Your daughter stirs in her sleep. Just once. You don't even turn your head. You know the difference between a dream twitch and true waking. That's another thing women learn. The language of sleep. You've come to believe that there are two kinds of tired. The tired of the body and the tired of being unseen. Most days, you carry both. But some nights like this one, the fire makes you visible to yourself again. You let the needle rest, just for a moment, and you remember the time you stood up for a neighbor when the bailiff sneered, the day you caught the chicken that no one else could catch, the moment you delivered a baby in a barn because no one else arrived in time. Small victories, unrecorded, unrepeatable, unforgotten. You lean back and let out a breath that sounds like a prayer, but isn't. You're not asking for anything tonight. You're simply offering thanks to the fire, to the wool, to the mended sleeve, to the ridiculous goose miracle, to the invisible web of women who keep the world stitched and spinning. And somewhere far away, or perhaps just beneath your feet, the earth hears you. Tomorrow, there will be more mending, more soup to stir, more paths to walk. But for now, this quiet, this flame, this stillness is enough. You are enough. It's evening again, the kind of evening where even the wind seems tired. You've folded the last cloth, covered the last loaf, tucked the last child in, and now you're alone with your thoughts, which are both companion and burden. There's no one moment you can point to and say, "Here, this is how I survived." Survival didn't come with fanfare. It came with repetition, with knowing which berries to dry, which herbs to boil, which truths to keep quiet, and which lies to pretend you believed. Survival came from being clever, even when you were called foolish. From being kind, even when you weren't treated kindly. From holding your tongue and still keeping your mind. There were days you were invisible, and nights when your thoughts ran louder than the church bells. There were people who praised your patience and mistook it for passivity, who said you were quiet when really you were calculating. You survived by reading the room before the room read you. You did not always feel brave, but you were. Brave in a way that doesn't get mentioned in chronicles or carved into tombstones. Brave in a way that only other women understand. The kind of brave that looks like boiling water while hiding your tears. That sounds like a laugh in the middle of a funeral. That feels like staying upright when every part of you wants to crumple. And now, centuries later, you sit here listening to this. And maybe, just maybe, some part of you remembers. Maybe your hands feel the echo of another woman's hands, wringing out linens by a river. Maybe your breath falls in rhythm with a long-forgotten lullaby. Maybe you remember her, not with facts, but with feeling. That's how her memory survives. Through you, through the bread you make with care, the stories you whisper at night, the way you sit at the window and notice the moon. All of it echoes her, the woman who never made it into the history books, but made it through history just the same. They called her ordinary, but there was nothing ordinary about enduring so much and still finding time to hum. They called her obedient. But obedience, as you've learned, is often a mask for strategy. They called her forgotten. But look, here she is, in the way you sip something warm before bed, in the quiet strength of your jaw when someone interrupts you, in the private jokes you share with other women where you don't need to explain because they already know. You are not her descendant by blood, perhaps, but by spirit, by choice, by care. You have survived too, not in the same way, not with the same hunger or frostbitten toes, but with your own set of bruises and brilliance. This isn't just history, it's inheritance, and it's yours now to carry forward, or perhaps to rest. Because tonight, the work is done, the hearth is lit, the door is locked, and you are safe. You did enough. You were enough. And somewhere in a quiet fold of time, a woman who never knew your name smiles in solidarity. She survived. You survived. And together, you've kept the story going. The candles have burned low. Outside, the wind no longer howls. It exhales softly, like it too has grown tired from the weight of so many years. And here you are, not a queen or a chronicler, just a listener, lying quietly in the dark, having wandered through stories woven from straw and silence. You've walked through kitchens and cloisters, fields and fever dreams, births and funerals, all from the hush of your own room. And maybe along the way, you saw something that felt familiar. A glimpse of weariness in a peasant's hands, the stubborn tilt of a girl's chin, the quiet rebellion of a laugh at the wrong time. These women, these so-called ordinary women, they weren't legends carved in stone, but they were real, raw, soft, resilient. And now they rest with you, folded gently into the seams of your understanding. Their stories aren't over. You've kept them breathing just a little longer. You've turned their work into wisdom, their silence into song, and perhaps tonight you'll drift into sleep with the faintest whisper of wool and wood smoke, with the echo of footsteps on dirt floors, with the knowledge that survival isn't always loud, but it is always powerful. So let yourself rest now. You've listened well. You've remembered kindly. And that's enough. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.